The mountain man stared at two towering Apache sisters collapsed in his yard, blood pooling beneath them in the muddy storm water, unaware that saving their lives would bind him to an ancient marriage law by dawn. In the valley below, settlers dismissed him as the hermit who talks to trees, certain his fate lay in dying alone and forgotten among the peaks. But when the giant warrior women stirred to consciousness, one nearly 7 feet of pure Apache fury, the other scarred and defiant, their presence transformed his isolated world into something far more dangerous. These weren't ordinary refugees. They carried secrets of tribal politics and federal manhunts that could destroy all three of them. Hidden beneath their grateful eyes lurked ancient customs that would force impossible choices between sacred duty and forbidden desire. When Apache war drums echoed through the canyon at sunrise, would his act of mercy become his death sentence or his salvation? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The thunder cracked like rifle fire across the Colorado peaks as Colton Ashford stumbled through his cabin door, soaked to the bone. Lightning illuminated two massive forms sprawled in his yard. He grabbed his lantern and stepped back into the storm. Two Apache women lay unconscious in the mud. The smaller one stretched over 6 feet. The larger one towered near 7. Both wore traditional buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork. Blood seeped from wounds on their arms and shoulders. Colton had seen plenty of Apache warriors in his years on the frontier. None had ever been this tall. None had ever been women, and none had ever collapsed on his doorstep, half dead. He checked for breathing. Both still lived. The storm raged harder, turning the ground to soup beneath them. If he left them outside, they would die. If he brought them inside, he might die when their people came looking. Thunder boomed again. Colton made his choice. The larger woman weighed more than most men. Colton dragged her inside first, his back screaming with each step. The smaller one followed. He positioned them near his fireplace and began tending their wounds with strips of clean cloth. The larger woman's eyes snapped open. She sat up with startling speed, hand reaching for a knife that wasn't there. Her gaze swept the cabin before settling on Colton. "You are the mountain hermit," she said in clear English. "You're on my land," Colton replied. "You're hurt." She studied his weathered face. "Why did you help us?" "Storm would have killed you." The smaller woman stirred. Her eyes opened more cautiously. She assessed the situation with the calculating look of a natural strategist. "Sister, we are safe for now." "I am Wyona," the larger woman said. "This is Tallulah. We are daughters of Chief Nahundi." Colton had heard of Chief Nahundi. The Apache leader commanded respect from both his own people and federal government. His daughters fleeing through a mountain storm meant serious trouble. "What are you running from?" Colton asked. Tallulah sat up slowly. "Chief Black Elk demands I marry his son, the son who beats his wives. I refused." "So you ran?" "So we ran," Wyona corrected. "I would not let my sister face punishment alone." Colton understood. Apache justice could be harsh for those who defied tribal arrangements. But federal justice could be worse. There are bounties on Apache who attack settlers. Marshals patrol these mountains. "We attacked no one," Tallulah said firmly. "We defend ourselves when attacked." Marshals might not see the difference. Wyona stood to her full, imposing height. "You know our ways, mountain man. You speak some of our language. Why?" Colton stared into the fire. 3 years ago, he had tried to prevent a massacre at Willow Creek. He had warned the Apache village of approaching cavalry. The soldiers arrived to find an empty camp, their surprise attack ruined. When word spread that Colton had spoiled their plans, the settlers drove him from town. They called him a traitor, a savage lover. Some wanted him hanged. He had retreated to these mountains to escape their hatred. Now their hatred meant nothing compared to the choice before him. "I studied Apache customs," he said simply. "Seemed important to understand my neighbors." Tallulah watched him carefully. Our father speaks of you. You once pulled his youngest daughter from the river when she fell through ice. Colton remembered. A little Apache girl had chased a rabbit onto frozen water. The ice cracked. She fell through. He had happened to be hunting nearby and pulled her out before she drowned. Her grateful family had thanked him, but he thought nothing more of it. That was years ago, he said. Our father does not forget debts, Wyona said, blood debts especially. Outside, the storm began to fade. Dawn would come soon. With dawn would come searchers, Apache warriors looking for the chief's daughters, federal marshals looking for wanted fugitives. Neither group would be pleased to find them in a white settler's cabin. You need to keep moving, Colton said. Both sides will be hunting you. Where can we go? Tallulah asked. We cannot return home without accepting the marriage. We cannot stay in white settlements without facing arrest. Mexico, Colton suggested. Cross the border. Start over. Wyona shook her head. We are not runners by nature, we are fighters. Sometimes running is fighting. Sometimes helping strangers is fighting too, Tallulah said quietly. The words hung in the air. Colton knew what she meant. By sheltering them, he had chosen a side. By tending their wounds, he had declared himself. The settlers who already despised him would brand him a criminal. The law that already suspected him would call him an accomplice. But looking at these two remarkable had lived alone in these mountains, speaking to no one, trusting no one, mattering to no one. Their presence reminded him what it felt like to have a purpose beyond simple survival. Hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Multiple horses approaching fast. Too organized to be random travelers. Too early to be friendly visitors. Wyona moved to the window. Apache riders, many of them. Tallulah joined her sister. Father's war paint. He comes not as negotiator but as enforcer of tribal law. The hoofbeats grew louder. Colton reached for his rifle, then stopped. Fighting Chief Nahundi's warriors would accomplish nothing except getting all three of them killed. What happens when he finds you here? Colton asked. The sisters exchanged a meaningful look. Tallulah spoke first. That depends on how he interprets the old laws. What old laws? The laws about blood debts, Wyona said grimly, and the obligations they create. The Apache warriors surrounded Colton's cabin like wolves circling prey. Chief Nahundi dismounted with the fluid grace of a man half his age. War paint streaked his weathered face in bold red and black lines. He wore traditional buckskin adorned with eagle feathers that marked his status as both war chief and spiritual leader. Colton stepped outside with his hands visible. The sisters followed, their imposing frames casting long shadows in the morning light. 20 mounted warriors watched every movement with the stillness of predators. Chief Nahundi's dark eyes swept from his daughters to the mountain man who had sheltered them. He spoke in rapid Apache to Wyona. She responded in the same tongue, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. My daughter tells me you saved their lives, the chief said in English. His accent was slight, his words carefully chosen. She says you tended their wounds, fed them, protected them from the storm. I helped 2 people who needed help, Colton replied. You helped 2 Apache women who are wanted by federal marshals. You helped 2 daughters of a chief who defied tribal law. This was not a simple act of charity. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. A new group of riders emerged from the tree line. Deputy Marshal McAllister led 6 federal agents, their badges gleaming in the sunrise. The marshal was a thin man with sharp features and eyes like chips of flint. Chief Nahundi, McAllister called out. Those women are wanted for attacking settlers near Fort Collins. They come with us. The chief never took his eyes off Colton. These are my daughters. They fall under tribal jurisdiction. Not when they commit crimes against white settlers on federal land. The 2 groups of armed men faced each other across Colton's small clearing. Apache warriors gripped their rifles. Federal agents fingered their holsters. The morning air crackled with the promise of violence. Chief Nahundi raised his hand. The gesture commanded absolute silence from both sides. There is an older law at work here, the chief announced. A law that predates your federal jurisdiction and supersedes current tribal politics. McAllister shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. What law? The chief stepped closer to Colton. 3 winters ago, this man saved the life of my youngest daughter. She fell through ice on the Winter River. She would have drowned without his intervention. Colton remembered the incident clearly now. A small Apache girl chasing a rabbit across frozen water, the sickening crack of breaking ice, her terrified face disappearing beneath the surface, his desperate dive into water so cold it felt like liquid fire, the grateful tears of her family when he pulled her to shore. I remember, Colton said quietly. In our oldest traditions, a life debt creates sacred obligations. When you saved my daughter, you became bound to our family by blood law. When you saved my other daughters last night, you doubled that debt. Tallulah and Wyona exchanged glances. They understood something Colton did not yet grasp. The blood debt must be repaid, Chief Nahundi continued. Our ancient laws are clear about the form that repayment must take. McAllister interrupted impatiently. Your tribal laws don't override federal jurisdiction. Actually, they do, Colton said, surprising everyone. The Treaty of Fort Laramie recognizes Apache spiritual and marriage customs as legally binding. Federal courts have upheld those provisions multiple times. Every eye turned to him. McAllister looked stunned. The Apache warriors murmured among themselves. Even Chief Nahundi seemed impressed by the mountain man's knowledge. You know our treaties, the chief observed. I make it my business to understand the laws that govern these mountains. Colton had spent years studying legal precedents after the Willow Creek incident. He knew that federal Indian policy was a maze of contradictory laws and competing jurisdictions. He also knew that treaty obligations often trumped territorial statutes. The blood debt law is simple, Chief Nahundi explained. A man who saves the lives of unmarried Apache women becomes responsible for their welfare. That responsibility can only be fulfilled through marriage or adoption. The words hit Colton like a physical blow. Marriage? To both daughters, the chief confirmed, by sunset today, or all 3 of you face exile from Apache protection and federal justice. Tallulah stepped forward. Father, we cannot force this burden on him. The law is not about force. It is about honor. He accepted responsibility when he chose to save your lives. Wyona joined her sister. There must be another way. There is no other way. The old laws exist for good reasons. They create bonds between peoples. They prevent conflicts. They ensure protection for all parties. McAllister struggled to regain control of the situation. This is ridiculous. Those women are criminals. They cannot escape federal justice through some primitive marriage ritual. Chief Nahundi's eyes blazed. You call our laws primitive while your government breaks treaties daily? The tension ratcheted higher. Apache warriors raised their weapons slightly. Federal agents responded in kind. Colton found himself at the center of an impending battle that could ignite the entire territory. Wait, he said loudly. If I agree to this marriage, what exactly does that mean legally? The chief smiled for the first time. It means my daughters become your wives under both Apache law and federal treaty recognition. It means they gain the legal protections afforded to wives of United States citizens. It means the federal government cannot arrest them without first proving charges in tribal court. McAllister cursed under his breath. That could take months, long enough to prove their innocence, Tallulah said quietly. Colton looked at the 2 towering women who had stumbled into his life. Wyona stood with the bearing of a born warrior. Tallulah watched him with intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Both faced death or imprisonment without his help. And if I refuse, he asked, then you break sacred law. My daughters face tribal exile and federal arrest. You face the judgment of both peoples. The mountain man, who had lived alone for 3 years, faced the most important choice of his life. The sun climbed higher, marking time toward the sunset deadline that would seal all their fates. Colton studied the faces surrounding him. Apache warriors waited with stone expressions. Federal agents shifted restlessly in their saddles. The two giant sisters stood like pillars between the opposing forces, their fate hanging on his next words. "I accept the marriage," he said. Chief Nahundi nodded solemnly. "Then we proceed with ceremony before sunset. Marshal McAllister, you will witness that this union follows all federal treaty requirements." The deputy marshal's face darkened. "This is a mockery of justice." "This is justice according to laws your government signed," Colton replied, "unless you plan to violate federal treaties." McAllister had no answer. Breaking treaty law would bring unwanted attention from Washington. He dismounted with obvious reluctance, his agents following suit. The Apache warriors began preparations immediately. They cleared a ceremonial space in front of Colton's cabin. Sacred stones were arranged in a precise circle. Eagle feathers and sage appeared from leather pouches. Within an hour, the rough clearing had been transformed into a place of ancient power. Colton watched the proceedings with growing amazement. These men moved with the efficiency of soldiers, but the reverence of priests. Every gesture carried meaning. Every placement held significance. He was witnessing traditions that stretched back centuries. Moment. Panicking won't help anyone. Most white men would be terrified. Colton considered this. Most white men haven't spent years studying Apache customs. Most white men haven't lived alone in these mountains, thinking about what really matters. Tallulah tilted her head. What does matter? Doing right when it costs you something. Her expression softened. You could have turned us away, saved yourself all this trouble. Could have. Didn't want to. Why not? Colton looked at her directly for the first time. Tallulah stood nearly as tall as him, her dark eyes intelligent and fierce. Intricate tattoos marked her arms, telling stories of victories and honors. She carried herself like someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire communities. Because some things are worth the risk, he said quietly. Wyona joined them, carrying traditional Apache wedding garments. The ceremony requires proper dress. Father brought these from our village. She handed Colton a buckskin shirt, decorated with porcupine quills and painted symbols. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every detail spoke of hours of careful work by master artisans. This belonged to my grandfather, Wyona explained. He was a great peacemaker between tribes. Father thinks you have similar spirit. Colton accepted the shirt with appropriate gravity. I'm honored. Do not be honored yet. First, survive the ceremony. The sisters withdrew to change into their own ceremonial dress. When they returned, Colton barely recognized them. Gone were the travel-worn fugitives he had found in his yard. In their place stood two Apache princesses in full regalia. Tallulah wore white buckskin adorned with silver conchos and turquoise beads. Her long black hair was braided with eagle feathers that marked her royal status. She moved with the graceful confidence of someone born to leadership. Wyona's dress was similarly magnificent, but decorated with symbols of her role as a warrior protector. Bear claws hung from her necklaces. Painted designs on her arms told the story of battles won and enemies defeated. She looked capable of single-handedly fighting off entire cavalry units. Chief Nahundi called everyone to gather around the sacred circle. Apache warriors formed the inner ring. Federal agents stood outside them, clearly uncomfortable, but legally obligated to witness the proceedings. This ceremony joins 3 lives in bonds that cannot be broken by earthly authority, the chief began. The mountain man who saved my daughters becomes their husband and protector. They become his wives and guardians. All 3 become family under Apache law and federal recognition. He gestured for Colton to enter the circle. The mountain man stepped forward, feeling the weight of history settling around him like a heavy blanket. Every person present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Colton Ashford, do you accept sacred responsibility for the welfare and protection of these women? I do. Tallulah, daughter of my blood, do you accept this man as husband and provider? Tallulah met Colton's eyes as she answered, I accept him. Wyona, daughter of my blood, do you accept this man as husband and provider? I accept him, Wyona replied, her voice carrying the strength of her warrior training. Chief Nahundi began a prayer in Apache that lasted several minutes. The words rose and fell like music, calling on spirits and ancestors to bless the unusual union. Even McAllister seemed moved by the solemn power of the ritual. Sacred herbs were burned. The smoke wafted over the three participants, binding them in aromatic clouds that stung the eyes but cleansed the spirit. Colton felt something shifting inside him, as if ancient forces were rearranging the fundamental structure of his life. The chief produced 3 braided cords made from horsehair and sinew. He tied one around each person's wrist, connecting them in an unbroken triangle. What joins in this circle cannot be separated by outside force, he declared. Apache law recognizes this marriage. Federal treaty law recognizes this marriage. The spirits of the mountains recognize this marriage. McAllister stepped forward reluctantly. I witnessed this ceremony as legal under existing treaties between the United States government and the Apache Nation. His words made the union official under both jurisdictions. The sisters were now legally protected as wives of a United States citizen. Any charges against them would require tribal court approval before federal prosecution could proceed. As the sun touched the western peaks, the ceremony concluded. Colton found himself married to 2 remarkable women he had known for less than a day. The arrangement should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like destiny. The Apache warriors began breaking down the ceremonial space. McAllister gathered his frustrated agents for departure. The immediate crisis had passed, but Colton sensed larger challenges ahead. Chief Nahundi approached him as the clearing emptied. You have shown great courage, mountain man, but courage alone will not be enough for what comes next. What comes next? The real test of whether this marriage serves justice or merely delays it. 3 days after the ceremony, the awkwardness of their arrangement settled over the cabin like morning fog. Colton had given the sisters his bed while he slept on the floor near the fireplace. They moved around each other with careful politeness, 3 strangers bound by sacred law, but divided by culture and circumstance. Tallulah spent her mornings teaching Colton proper Apache greetings and customs. Her patience impressed him. She corrected his pronunciation without condescension, explained traditions without judgment. When their hands accidentally touched during lessons, neither pulled away immediately. Wyona appointed herself guardian of their small perimeter each dawn, checking for threats. Her massive frame moved through the forest with surprising stealth. She returned each morning with reports of federal agents watching from distant ridges. They wait for us to make mistake, she told Colton over breakfast. Give them excuse to ignore treaty protection. The mountain man understood. McAllister had accepted the marriage under legal pressure, but he clearly hoped to find another way to arrest the sisters. Any violation of their protected status would void the treaty obligations. On the 4th day, unexpected visitors arrived. 3 settlers from the valley rode up to the cabin with grim expressions. Colton recognized them as men who had previously called him a traitor and savage lover. Their leader was Marcus Webb, a thick-set rancher with a permanent scowl. He dismounted without invitation and gestured toward the sisters. Heard you went and married a couple of Apache murderers, Ashford. Heard you still stick your nose in other people's business, Webb. This ain't just your business anymore. Those women killed settlers, now you're harboring them legal-like. Makes you part of the problem. Tallulah emerged from the cabin. Her imposing height made Webb take an involuntary step backward. She wore traditional dress, but carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "We have killed no innocent people," she said calmly. Webb's face reddened. "That what you call the Murphy family? Innocent?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Colton felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Murphy family had been found dead 2 weeks ago, their homestead burned. 3 children among the victims. "We know nothing of these deaths," Tallulah replied, but Colton heard a slight tremor in her voice. "Apache arrows were found in the bodies. Apache horses tracked, leaving the scene. You and your giant sister were seen in the area that same day." Wyona appeared beside her sister, making the 3 settlers look even smaller by comparison. "Many Apache travel these lands. Many own horses and arrows. But only 2 match your description," Webb pressed. "Only 2 had reason to attack white families." "What reason?" Colton demanded. "Revenge. Everyone knows Apache blame all settlers for cavalry attacks on their camps." The logic was flawed, but persuasive to minds already convinced of Apache guilt. Colton realized how easily fear could twist facts into weapons of hatred. "The federal investigation is ongoing," he said carefully. "Until it concludes, my wives are under treaty protection." Webb spat in the dirt. "Your wives. That what you call this mockery? I call it legal marriage under federal law. Won't be legal much longer. Word is Washington's sending new orders, something about suspending treaty protections for suspected murderers." The threat was clear. Political pressure was building to circumvent the legal protection the ceremony had provided. If Washington issued new guidelines, McAllister could arrest the sisters regardless of their marriage status. After the settlers left, Colton found himself studying his wives with new uncertainty. He wanted to believe their protestations of innocence, but doubt gnawed at him like a persistent wound. That evening, as they sat around the fire, he decided to address the issue directly. "Tell me about the Murphy family." Tallulah and Wyona exchanged glances. Finally, Tallulah spoke. "We were hunting in that area. We heard gunshots and screaming. When we investigated, we found the homestead already burning, bodies already dead. Why didn't you report it?" "Report to who? The same federal marshals who hunt us, the same settlers who blame us for every misfortune?" Wyona leaned forward. "We saw other tracks, unshod horses, Apache horses, but not ours." "Other Apache?" "Rogue warriors who follow no chief, men cast out from tribes for breaking sacred laws." This possibility hadn't occurred to Colton. Rogue Apache did exist, warriors who had rejected tribal authority and survived through raiding and violence. They answered to no chief and respected no treaties. "How many rogues?" "Perhaps 6 or 8, Tallulah estimated. "They move in small groups, strike quickly, disappear into badlands where no one follows." "And they would attack innocent families?" "They attack anyone, Apache villages included. They are outcasts who survive through terror." The explanation felt plausible, but Colton needed more than plausibility. He needed proof. The sisters' lives depended on establishing their innocence beyond reasonable doubt. "Can you track these rogues?" Wyona nodded slowly. "Possibly. But tracking them means leaving safety of this cabin, means exposing ourselves to federal agents. Also means facing dangerous men with nothing to lose," Tallulah added. Colton considered the options. Staying hidden provided temporary safety, but solved nothing. Eventually, political pressure would override treaty protections. The sisters would face arrest, and likely execution, unless their innocence was proven definitively. "We need evidence," he decided, "real evidence that clears you and identifies the actual killers." "Evidence requires investigation," Wyona pointed out. "Investigation requires leaving protected territory." "Then we leave." Both sisters stared at him. You would risk your life for our reputations? I would risk my life for justice. Tallulah reached across the fire and touched his hand. The gesture was small, but significant, the first voluntary physical contact between them since the ceremony. You are not what we expected in a husband, she said quietly. What did you expect? Someone who married us out of obligation and treated us as burdens. Instead we found someone who married us out of honor and treated like warriors going into battle. As they prepared for bed, Colton realized their strange arrangement was evolving into something deeper than legal convenience. Trust was building between them, along with mutual respect and perhaps the seeds of genuine affection. But trust would not stop bullets or legal persecution. Only truth could do that. They left the cabin before dawn, moving single file through mountain trails that few white men had ever seen. Wynonna led with the silent grace of a born tracker. Tallulah followed, reading signs in bent grass and disturbed stones. Colton brought up the rear, marveling at how the sisters moved through wilderness like ghosts. The Murphy homestead lay 15 miles south through treacherous terrain. Federal agents still patrolled the main routes, forcing them to take hidden paths that added hours to their journey. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the burned remains of the family's cabin. Smoke no longer rose from the ruins, but the smell of charred wood lingered in the mountain air. Blackened timber frames stood like skeletal fingers against the sky. Personal belongings lay scattered in the dirt, abandoned by investigators who had already formed their conclusions. "Stay hidden while I examine the scene," Wynonna instructed, disappearing down the slope with remarkable stealth for someone her size. Colton and Tallulah watched from cover as the giant Apache woman moved through the devastation like a hunting cat. She studied tracks in the dirt, examined arrow fragments, touched burned wood with the focused intensity of someone reading an invisible story. When she returned 20 minutes later, her expression was grim. 6 riders attacked this place, all Apache horses, but not from our father's tribe. "How can you tell?" Colton asked. "Different horseshoe markings, different arrow fletching patterns, different style of rope burns on the victims." Tallulah nodded grimly. "Rogues use techniques learned from multiple tribes. They have no single tradition to follow." "The tracks lead northeast toward the Badlands," Wynonna continued. 2 days old, maybe 3. They followed the trail through increasingly desolate country. The lush mountain forests gave way to rocky canyons and scrub brush. Water became scarce. Game disappeared. This was country where only the desperate or the outcast could survive for long. On their second day of tracking, they found the rogue camp. The outcasts had chosen their position well. A natural cave system provided shelter, while commanding views of all approaches. Fresh horse droppings indicated recent occupation. Cooking fires still smoldered in stone-lined pits. 8 men, Wynonna estimated, studying the signs. Well-armed, experienced warriors. "Where are they now?" Colton whispered. Tallulah pointed toward fresh tracks leading west. "Hunting. Or raiding. They will return before dark." They had perhaps 6 hours to search the camp for evidence before the rogues returned. 6 hours to find proof that would clear the sisters of murder charges and identify the real killers. The cave system extended deep into the mountainside. The rogues had been using it as a base for weeks, possibly months. Stolen goods filled the caverns. Weapons, clothing, household items, and personal belongings taken from multiple raids. In the deepest chamber, Colton made a discovery that turned his blood cold. Children's clothing, toys, a small wooden doll carved with loving care. These belonged to the Murphy children, the innocent victims whose deaths had sparked the manhunt for Tallulah and Wynonna. "They keep trophies," Tallulah said quietly, her voice thick with disgust. "Like animals marking territory." Wynonna found more evidence. Apache weapons that belonged to no recognized tribe. Maps showing settler homesteads marked for future attacks. Letters in broken English demanding ransom for captives who had probably already been killed. But the most damning evidence lay in a leather pouch hidden beneath stone cairn. Documents that revealed the scope of the rogues' conspiracy. "They work with white men," Colton said, reading through papers by lamplight. "Corrupt land speculators who want to drive settlers away from valuable mining claims." The scheme was diabolical in its simplicity. The rogues would attack isolated homesteads, making the murders look like Apache revenge killings. Fear would drive away other settlers, leaving valuable land available for illegal claim by the speculators' associates. Marcus Webb, Tallulah read from one document. "He is partner in this conspiracy." Colton felt pieces clicking into place. Webb had been unusually quick to accuse the sisters, unusually well informed about investigation details, unusually eager to see them arrested or killed. He profits twice, Wynonna realized. Once from stolen land, once from blaming innocent Apache for the thefts. They gathered the evidence quickly. The sun was already sinking toward the western peaks. Soon, the rogues would return to find their secrets exposed. As they prepared to leave, Colton heard something that made his heart stop. Voices echoing from the canyon below. The outcasts were returning early. "Move," Wynonna hissed. They scrambled through the cave system toward a rear exit Wynonna had discovered during her scouting. Behind them, voices grew louder as the rogues discovered signs of intrusion. The rear exit opened onto a sheer cliff face. A narrow ledge ran along the rock wall, barely wide enough for single-file movement. One slip would mean death on the stones, 200 feet below. Wynonna led them along the ledge with agonizing care. Her massive frame pressed against the cliff face as loose rocks crumbled under her weight. Tallulah followed with the fluid balance of a natural athlete. Colton brought up the rear, trying not to look down at the place. "There," Tallulah pointed toward a game trail that descended the far side of the canyon. "We can reach horses if we move quickly." They half ran, half slid down the treacherous slope as pursuit voices grew closer. The rogues knew this country better than anyone. They would not be easy to escape, but they had what they came for. Evidence that would clear the sisters and expose the real conspiracy. Evidence that would prove Apache innocence and white guilt in the settler murders. As they reached their horses and spurred towards safety, Colton realized something profound had changed between the three of them. They had faced danger together, trusted each other completely, worked as a unified team despite their different backgrounds and cultures. The strange marriage arrangement was becoming something real, something deeper than legal convenience or cultural obligation. The evidence they carried would save Tallulah and Wynonna from false accusations. But Colton suspected it might also save all three of them from lives of loneliness and isolation. Behind them, the rogues emerged from the canyon in furious pursuit. Ahead lay the dangerous journey back to civilization, and the even more dangerous task of confronting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial society. The real battle for justice was just beginning. They rode hard through the night, reaching Colton's cabin as dawn painted the peaks gold. Deputy Marshal McAllister waited on the porch with 6 federal agents, their weapons drawn, but not yet aimed. "You left protected territory," McAllister announced. "That voids your treaty protections." Colton dismounted slowly, the evidence pouch heavy in his saddlebags. "We left to prove their innocence. By running from federal investigation, by conducting our own investigation." He pulled out the documents and personal items they had recovered from the rogue camp. "Evidence that clears my wives and identifies the real killers." McAllister's expression shifted from suspicious to curious as Colton spread the contents across a wooden table. Children's clothing from the Murphy family. Maps marking future targets. Most damaging of all, the correspondence between the rogues and their white conspirators. "Marcus Webb is named specifically," Colton explained, pointing to the letters. He's been paying Apache outcasts to attack isolated homesteads. The goal is to drive away settlers so his associates can claim valuable mining land illegally. The deputy marshal studied the evidence with growing amazement. These are authentic? Taken from the rogue camp 2 days ago, the same camp where we found belongings from multiple raids, including items stolen from the Murphy children. Tallulah stepped forward. The real killers are Apache men, cast out from all tribes for breaking sacred laws. They work for white criminals who profit from fear and death. Wynonna added, "We can lead you to their camp. Prove everything we claim." McAllister looked conflicted. The evidence was compelling, but arresting prominent settlers like Webb would create political complications. Admitting that innocent Apache had been falsely accused would embarrass the territorial government. Hoofbeats announced new arrivals. Chief Nahundi approached with a small escort, his weathered face unreadable. Behind him rode an unexpected figure, a tall Apache warrior Colton didn't recognize. "This is Ayanna," Chief Nahundi announced, Wynonna's intended husband before these troubles began. The young warrior dismounted with fluid grace. His eyes found Wynonna immediately, and the giant woman's stern expression softened for the first time since Colton had known her. "I have come to ask the spirits for guidance," Chief Nahundi continued. "The marriage law served its purpose by protecting my daughters. But I wonder if justice requires reconsidering the bonds it created." Colton felt his stomach tighten. Reconsidering how? "The ancient law I invoked has deeper provisions than I initially revealed. If genuine love exists between only 2 of the 3 married parties, the bonds can be dissolved to honor true affection over legal obligation." Tallulah moved closer to Colton. "Father speaks of old traditions about choice versus duty. Our ancestors understood that forced love serves no one," Chief Nahundi explained. "The law allows release from marriage bonds when real partnership exists between willing hearts." Wynonna looked between her sister and Colton. "You have found something together, something that makes the marriage ceremony a beginning rather than an ending." The truth hung in the morning air like incense. Colton and Tallulah had grown closer during their investigation. Their partnership had evolved beyond legal convenience into genuine affection and mutual respect. McAllister interrupted the family discussion. "Before anyone dissolves anything, I need to verify this evidence and arrest the real perpetrators." "The rogues will have moved their camp by now," Wynonna warned. "They know we discovered their secrets." "But Webb hasn't moved," Colton pointed out. "He's still in the valley, still pretending to be a respected rancher while planning more murders." The deputy marshal made his decision. "I'm placing Marcus Webb under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and violation of territorial land laws. The charges against you 2 are officially dropped." Chief Nahundi smiled for the first time since arriving. "Then the marriage served justice as intended. Now it can serve love as intended." He spoke briefly in Apache to his daughters. Both women nodded respectfully. Then he approached Colton with ceremony. "The blood debt is satisfied. The legal protection is no longer needed. The marriage bonds are dissolved by mutual consent and tribal authority." The words should have felt like liberation, but Colton experienced only uncertainty. "What happens now?" Tallulah took his hand. "Now we choose freely what we want our lives to become." "And what do you choose?" "I choose to marry you again, not because ancient law demands it, but because my heart desires it." Wynonna embraced her sister warmly, then turned to Ayanna. "I choose to marry the man I loved before duty called me away." McAllister and his agents departed to arrest Webb and search for the remaining rogues. Chief Nahundi began preparations for new ceremonies, these based on choice rather than obligation. As the sun climbed higher, Colton found himself standing exactly where he had 3 weeks earlier, alone in his mountain clearing, contemplating an uncertain future, but everything had changed. Tallulah worked beside him, planning improvements to the cabin they would share as genuine partners. Wyona and Ayana made their own plans, discussing a future that honored both tradition and personal happiness. The small clearing buzzed with activity as Apache and federal authorities worked together to complete their investigations. The site would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier, when hatred and fear divided the two peoples. 6 months later, Colton's expanded cabin had become a thriving trading post, where Apache and settlers conducted business in mutual respect. The mountain man, once dismissed as a crazy hermit, now served as unofficial mediator for territorial disputes. Tallulah's strategic intelligence and cultural knowledge made her invaluable in negotiations between tribes and government officials. Her imposing presence commanded respect from men who had previously dismissed Apache women as powerless. Wyona and Ayana established their own homestead nearby, becoming legendary figures whose fairness and strength attracted visitors from across the territory. The giant Apache woman who had once fled tribal law now helped write new laws based on justice rather than revenge. The rogue conspiracy was fully exposed and prosecuted. Webb and his associates faced federal prison terms. The murdered families received justice, and their surviving relatives received compensation from the seized illegal profits. Most importantly, the unlikely marriage arrangement had proven that understanding could triumph over prejudice when people chose courage over fear. On quiet evenings, Colton and Tallulah sat together, watching sunsets paint the peaks in brilliant colors. Their love had grown from desperate circumstances into something deep and lasting. The mountain man who once talked only to trees now found himself at the center of a community built on respect and cooperation. The Apache sisters, who once faced exile or death, now lived as honored leaders in a society that valued their contributions. Justice had been served not through violence or revenge, but through dignity, truth, and the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when faced with impossible choices.